Okay, welcome to the Invaluable Educator. We are already at episode 3. Can you believe it, Jeffrey?
This has been going by so quickly, but it's like so cool just how much progress we've made in such a short amount of time.
Yes, yes, yes. And then, of course, if we weren't already doing enough, I decided that we're going to start a newsletter, which we've already got about 930 subscribers to our newsletter. So,
I see that.
shout out, Invaluable Educator. Thank you
Thank you,
all.
everybody.
We really appreciate it, and I'll make sure to link it in the notes later, so you all
Yes.
can read. And the newsletter is really just sussing out the conversations that we're having here. So you're catching it live, you want to swing back, you want to remind yourself what we talked about. That's what the newsletter really kind of covers. So all of it original content.
Right.
So today we're going to talk a little bit about the intersection of education and social impact, which I think is a great idea. Jeffrey, do you want to give us a little bit more context around this particular topic? And then I would love to talk about why I think educators are uniquely positioned to lead this work.
Absolutely. I think when it comes to just the various conversations we've been having about the school system, about college, about how it's currently positioned, about student loan debt and things, it becomes more and more evident that we're going to need change at some point. And I think part of even this podcast is to bring about those conversations, right? For the right people to see it, for the people who are like, how can I get involved, to understand how they can get involved. And I think when it comes to education and social impact, educators already are social innovators, right?
Yeah.
You have to design curriculums. You have to understand stakeholder management of children, which are not, they're not adults, right? So it's like you have to manage energy levels and things like that. So when it comes to designing learning plans and when it comes to designing systems that are going to benefit students to learn better and to perform better as a result, educators are are uniquely positioned for that.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up, right? So already the idea that they're managing so many different personalities in one classroom. So on average, your average teacher in a class is managing somewhere between 25 to 30 kids over a matter of time. And then multiply that by several times during the school day, you can imagine that they are managing the personalities of 100 to 150 students who are all unique. And to your point, they're not adults, so they may not be as regulated, though frankly I know quite a few adults who are also not emotionally regulated, so maybe they need to go back to the classroom too. No, but seriously, so when you're thinking about that, being able to galvanize a group of people around a particular thought process, around a particular idea, educators are again uniquely qualified to do that work because they're understanding how to impart their content specialty, their knowledge, and translate it to 30 different students who have different learning styles, different learning abilities, who process information in their own unique and varied ways, and then have the ability to then do some data analysis through quizzes, checks for understanding, testing, to kind of figure out where are the strengths, where are those challenges. And when you're talking about putting together a social, when you're thinking about social impact, understanding all of those points and understanding people and understanding human relationship and what makes people passionate, and what kind of things affect people's lives, right? Understanding all of those barriers and all of those effects on a person's life, I think, and teachers see that every day. We see the effect of,
Right.
if you have a lack of nutrition, if you have a lack of stable
Mm,
home, if you have, um,
yes.
um, if you're worried about things economically, if you're stressed out about XYZ, if you have anxiety, if you have depression, teachers are constantly uh, being marred in all of the big feelings that children often have, that oftentimes they can't particularly handle. And so, the teacher has to be there to try to figure out how to maneuver that situation to calm the child down and then still get the learning to happen within the context of what else is going on within the classroom.
I have a question just for you as a particular, as a former educator, right? And still an educator in different senses, right? Did you find that the curriculum limited your ability to create the social innovation you wanted to see?
I guess if I follow the curriculum exactly, that would, to a degree, I think so, right? But I think what's amazing, and really things kind of depend, and I think unfortunately educators don't have the same sort of ability to be as creative as when I was in the classroom, the creativity that I could bring in. So yeah, I'm following a scope and sequence, let's say. I also found that, and let me also say that I also found that I had a higher standard than what the curriculum was asking for my students. So for example, I remember one of my first years at this particular high school, I'm teaching seniors, and none of them had read a book, like period. I was like, what do you mean? I was like, "You've never read a book from front to back?" And they're like, "No, we've never had to. We've just read short stories in a textbook." And I was like, "That's we're not doing that."
Mm-hmm.
So we started implementing novels. The kids had to read the autobiography of Malcolm X. We did Night by Eli Wiesel. I'm a huge Shakespeare fan, so we did a lot of Shakespeare. The kids loved Othello and Macbeth, and
Okay.
you know, because Shakespeare talks about like the human experience and it's drama. I'm like, y'all, this is like
Yes.
you're reading a soap opera, but it's in a
Yeah.
different language, and that's fine. I was like, the way that you talk to your friends is different than the way you talk with me. So think about it like as a form of hip hop. And once I started telling them that like it was a form of rap,
Ooh.
form of hip hop, they were like, "What, miss?" And they were going in, and then they would remix these things. So the creativity that we were able to do, and they were able to do character studies on Othello. They could do character studies on Iago. They could do character studies on Macbeth. And they'll be like, "Oh, and Desdemona, she was a thought." I mean, like just the whole thing, and they're going in. I mean, the kids we had me rolling, but they were so into it. And no one had taken the time to like, let me break down the why it's important for you all to read it. And then when we read Night by Eli Wiesel, and I don't know if you're familiar with Night,
That's a
but
good one. Yeah.
right. So for those of you who may not know it, but it's about his experience with his family living through the Holocaust and his time at Auschwitz. I haven't read it in a while, but I'm pretty sure that's where he was. And uh, it's a short book. I think it's 100 and some pages. It's not very long. Oh man, but the kids, they were like, "That's crazy." But then they also felt that they could really, in some ways, because of the trauma, and some of them have come from traumatic, were living through trauma, they felt connected to this man who they're like, who normally they would could care less about. And so then I actually brought in someone who was a Holocaust survivor to talk to a bunch of
Mm.
students in Newark, New Jersey, an urban environment who would normally not have even crossed paths with a person like that. And they just had so much respect, but also they saw so many of the commonalities and the humanness. And that's one of the things why I love about being an English teacher is that I did have the ability through books and storytelling and the different mediums and the creativity we could do where we connected with our humanness. And so I think it created just a really magical environment in my particular classroom. I think it's very tragic that we've got this movement of banning books, this movement which is really, I mean, we can talk about why people are banning books and the politics of it, but what we're really doing is we're trying to divorce our students from understanding critical thinking around empathy, around compassion, around
Mm.
understanding somebody else's story, somebody else's lens. We're taking away even more so their humanity. And I think that that's the most tragic thing about the banning of books that is going on across the country. That's the saddest thing to me. But I will say, and I will stand up and we'll just give a shout out to our libraries. I'm gonna tell you, the library and the library systems are doing an amazing job. It's free. All you got to do is share your address, and you have so many resources available to you. I could just talk about what's going on in Miami-Dade County Library. You can have they have podcasts there. Teenagers can go, like if you need a place to hang out, like after school, you could learn different languages there. Obviously, you can pull out the books for free. You can have actual physical books, or you can do audio books. And these are free resources. And the library system across the United States is just stellar. So I just want to give just a shout out to the libraries and the librarians out there because you guys are also on the front lines and you are ensuring that these stories are still staying in the popular culture and in the monolith. So even if the schools are divorcing themselves from that for whatever reasons that they have to politically, as individuals, as families, as communities, we can go to our local library and we can continue to engage with text and with stories, which I think is important to keep the humanity and the empathy, the compassion and the kindness alive.
Absolutely. The library is an invaluable resource, and I would encourage everyone to take advantage of it. Physical and digital resources, there's so much that it has to offer. Um,
Yeah.
and just like even a quick anecdote, like I went with a friend one time to I think a Miami-Dade library, and they even had a music studio there. So it's like empowering creativity because there's multiple ways, you know what I'm saying, for us to learn. There's the audio visual, there's, you know what I'm saying, it's really really cool. So that's a resource I would encourage every educator, new and really seasoned, to leverage for sure.
Yes.
um, what I really like that you mentioned is you mentioned Elie Wiesel's book, and I think that has to do with by exposing them to concepts like that to help them to feel their own trauma, right? Maybe through the lens of someone else who's experiencing a different trauma. You're facilitating cross-cultural collaboration.
Mm.
Those are skills that are going to be incredibly useful when it comes to soft skills in the workplace, when it comes to industry and things like that. That empathy and compassion that you're talking about with people who are not necessarily from their communities, they now know how to have those conversations and create bridges.
I'm glad that you brought that up. I never even thought about it. Yes, the cross cultural collaboration. I mean, that is true, right? So not only was it cross culture, but it was also cross generations, right? So there was some generational gaps that were going on that were being bridged, which I think is also fascinating and very helpful in the workspace and the work environment. Which also does remind me of some collaborations that we have been able to do throughout my career. And one of them was that like we took a bunch of kids from New York City, and they came in on a Saturday, and then they interacted with students from Nigeria. And so we were all connected through technology, and they're playing a literacy and career exploration game. But what they're really doing is understanding each other's countries, modalities, the way they think, the way they talk, speak, how they dress, and like having these interactions with people who they normally wouldn't have because of the power of technology, right? And that's the beauty of what tech can do. And so when we're talking about the intersection of education and social impact and social change, technology will play and will continue to play an amazing role in allowing for these cross cultural collaborations that are happening. And I think that that's always a great point of reflection. And it allows, again, I think, for kids to just see. I think experience and understanding other people is probably your best. I think it's the number one way to be educated, in my opinion. um Experiencing things is the way to like learn, like, so being experiential, like if you look at babies, what are they always doing? They're always touching, they're always feeling, they have to feel things to experience, to learn, to figure it out. They're watching your facial expressions, and then they're mimicking those facial expressions as they're learning. Watching babies is actually so fascinating. If you want to understand like how people learn, watch babies.
Hmm.
It's fascinating to see them and the ways that they think through things and maneuver. And I say that as someone who's watched my niece and nephew, and as they've grown into the young beings that they are. They're 8 and 6 currently, but just the evolution of when they were children and like the ways that their minds were working was just fascinating. So anyway, I can go off on a tangent. Maybe
Wow,
that's another time to talk
that's
about
beautiful. Yeah,
the
yeah.
beauty of babies, but the experiential learning. So in the Northeast, they're considered the top quote unquote schools in the country. I'm talking from a public schools perspective. So, historically, Massachusetts, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey have the top schools in the country, and then California, also, just based off of the statistics. One of the things that I tell people, and the reason why I think that that's true, especially in New York, is you could be the poorest person in New York City, but just walking around your city or just taking the 225 subway ride will have you just by osmosis hearing different languages, seeing different walks of life, interacting with different religions, um, and and I think that that's one of the reasons why the school systems are actually a little bit better and the students can or test better is because they have these sort of osmosis experiences that they can take because they live in such a diverse community. Even if their neighborhood is exactly like them, once they step outside of their neighborhood through the subway system, they're in a completely different environment, or just being on the subway, period. They're in a completely, or on the public bus, they're in a completely different environment. And most of America does not have that uh, does not have that. You are usually just in a homogenous kind of neighborhood and a homogenous kind of culture. So you're only exposed to what you're exposed to, and I think that that limits the capacity to critically think, problem solve, etc. And that's one of the main reasons I think why you have such poor performing schools in the rest of the United States.
And that's part of one of the reasons, and I'm really glad you mentioned technology because I feel like it creates that bridge, right? Like where who you don't have living next to you as a neighbor or who you don't have within your vicinity now through technology, through virtual and remote learning experiences, occasionally, right? We can facilitate collaborations with different kinds of people. So I'm kind of curious as to what you think about maybe the role of hybrid education when it comes to facilitating this cultural competency, if you will.
I have and I guess by hybrid you mean that, their kids are taking classes online, or can you tell me a little bit more about what you mean by the
Yeah,
hybrid?
I'm because I know back in the time of when COVID was announced and lockdowns and things like learning had went remote,
Yes.
but now I know that I'm assuming, right? I'm assuming that potentially there might be a similar model to a number of workplaces where there's a hybrid approach now. I'm wondering if education has also taken a hybrid approach with some in-person experiences and other experiences, maybe where they're still in the class, but like they're interacting virtually or different things.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are schools who are definitely online, and the kids can go online, even though ironically they're still in the school building but interacting online. I think that's an interesting point about, can the kids go to school like 2 or 3 days a week, like in person, and then the other days they're doing something else. And I think some schools have that, right? Maybe if they're, especially if they're in high school, they might be going out and doing an internship, they might be working. So there's that bridge between what's happening in real world and then they're learning as well. I don't think that those models are prevalent. I mean, I think the old school model is still the number one model that we have going on. Um, and I will say that like this is where things do get a little tricky. I do personally believe, like, yeah, you can go to Khan Academy or YouTube University and learn quite a few things, but I think that takes a certain personality, and I think that's true for an adult, and that's also true for kids. That is not like all kids can just sit and get and just like listen. No, a lot of them will need human interaction, human hand holding. They'll need to like know, certain concepts, and they'll need to have someone there that they can ask questions to, they can facilitate, or also they just want to have human connection. And I think that that's something important. We all need human connection. Uh, Even the most introverted of us need to have some kind of
Yeah.
human connection at some point in time. We can't all live behind our computer all day long. And even when people do live behind their computer, what are they doing? They're gaming in gaming communities. They are looking
Yes.
for ways to be in community with
Yes.
others.
Yes.
They're not
Yes.
just living in isolation, right? And
Yes.
so, like, there's always that piece. I think that one of the problems that we do have in education is that we believe that all kids and all people and all of them, which is the same thing with work, that all kids, all people, everybody, we can all fit into this square, that we can all work 9 to 5, or that we can all be up and ready to learn at 7 o'clock in the morning when school
Mm.
starts, right? Like, that's not true. Some people are really good at midnight. Like, that's when their brain is like on fire, and that's when they have the information that they have, and that's when they're most productive. And so I think we need to structure education and therefore working and the work environment around that kind of flexibility so that people can actually be the most productive and they can lean into what makes the most amount of sense for them. And um, I'm in touch with my sciatic rhythm. I was just saying that to somebody else. But it's, I'm a woman in my 40s. It's taking me until like, I think until my 30s to really like be like, actually, um, I like being up early in the morning. That's not because like I want to be braggadocious, like I can get up without an alarm, and I'm like out here, like a lot of these CEOs, billionaires, and people tell you. No, I like laterally get up. I don't use an alarm clock. My body automatically
Yes,
wakes up
yes.
early in the morning. That's how I am, and then I know like what are the hours I'm most productive. When is it better for me to have like when I have to just lock in and just do a whole bunch of work? When is it great for me? What time of day is good for me to have meetings? What time of day is good for me for it to just be about me? Then when do I need to go to sleep? And like understanding that rhythm is important. But knowing that about myself, I also realized like which I inherently knew, like I could never really work a real 9 to 5 office job. Like just I knew even as a kid, like that wasn't for me. Um, and I can imagine a lot of people feel that way. And yet the structure is in such a way, and the school system is making you feel like you have to be structured, right? And so I talked about this before. The school system is making you a structured robot, therefore you are a structured robot. Now you're upset because AI is going to take your job. Yes, they will, because you are a robot basically to your company.
I think that's really interesting. And I think just to add to your point, you're mentioning that we're not all the same. And I think that has to do with the diversification of paths, which means like I feel like when it comes to educators and social innovation, it goes deeper than just curriculum,
Yeah.
but it goes to individual. And I think what you're talking about is you're talking about individual social innovation too, like
Mhm.
learning adapted to who you are and
Yeah.
learning adapted to how you best work. And I
Yeah.
think that's really interesting.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And the other piece that I wanted to mention about the social component is I have been seeing a it's interesting because I think every older generation kind of has always something negative to say about the generations after them. It's something that I've just noticed. But as someone who actually interacts with the younger generation quite a bit, one of the things that I think is erroneous is this idea that they're very individualistic. I think our generation, the generations above us, are actually much more individualistic than the ones that are currently in school. And the reason I'm bringing this up in this particular episode is because they care a lot about what is happening in the world. They want to know that the work that they are doing is about means something, and that it's not just about making money and having like a stable life. They want to know that like what they're doing in the world is impactful. And if
Yes.
you can't make those connections for and with them, they're like, we're not interested. Like, okay, cool. But how's this going to change the climate, or how's this going to change what's happening in my neighborhood? I'm seeing homelessness out here, or um, my neighborhood is full of litter. So like, you know they care much more about these impactful goods, and so, which is great, right? Because now you've got a generation of folks who actually aren't individualistic, who actually really care about community and environment and climate. And we can harness that if we do this in such a beautiful way. And again, educators are on the front line because they're the ones who are interacting, who can say, unlike what everybody thinks about them, because you don't interact with them, but I do on a continuous basis. And I'm telling you right now, these kids care about social impact and social good. That doesn't mean they're still, still kids, they're still growing, they're still going to have their issues, but ultimately they really have a grasp of what's going on in the world, and I think in ways that have not historically been the case.
I was recently speaking to the director of programming for Americon Tech Miami. And one of the things that I was saying with regards to that whole point that you're making when it comes to students and essentially like the tools that they're leveraging when it comes to social innovation, I think AI, right? AI is one of those tools, for instance, where it's like, how can we improve students' experiences when it comes to taking hold of this new transformation that's basically taking place? And I think I'd like to insert that a little bit, because it's like we need educators who care about the subject material. When you're talking about Gen Z, right, caring about impact driven things, I feel like, okay, the very problem of having biased AI algorithms
Mm.
that are not diverse with data sets, and diverse populations are not being represented enough. I don't know if you heard about the ChatGPT incident where people said, "Oh, design how you think I look based on our conversations," and they got the exact same man, or like a
No,
variation of the same man.
no, I did not hear about that. Oh my
That's a prime example, and I was speaking to her about essentially, okay, what I would do if I was in that position to go ahead and help influence the students with AI and how to leverage technologies. I think it has to do with that, encouraging the current generation, hey, you can get in the driver's seat and you can use what you're learning like in the classroom today to make a difference. I feel like education that goes ahead and bridges that kind of gap will resonate a lot more when it comes to the current generation. To your point, so I'd
Yeah,
love to.
yeah, no, I totally agree. And again, so this is the invaluable educator. The educators play a crucial role in helping to bridge that gap and in helping our students harness their fears, their anxieties, their anger around the way the world is. They feel like they're inheriting a world that's just not great, ultimately. And the evidence is kind of pointing that way. So they're not necessarily wrong. And so to harness that into positive action. And the person who's with them the most amount of time are the teachers in the classroom. Just like adults, we spend the most amount of time at work. Kids, they spend the most amount of their time, their day, their quality time in school. And so you've got people there who can help harness this angst into something positive, in a way. Yeah, and I say angst because I feel like the angst.
Yeah.
I think there's an undercurrent of angst in the generations after us a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, given the lockdown and everything that's happened with the economy and all of the instability, like there's definitely
There's definitely,
definitely
you're
been.
like, there is definitely angst, y'all. Okay,
Yes, yes.
so that's
I
great.
think I think though, to your point, it's like, what if we were able to leverage that anxiety and turn that into innovation?
Yeah, right.
Anxiety about the future. Like it's just,
Yeah,
yeah.
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 And I think education and again educators will play a very crucial role in the ways that we need to do that is to elevate their voices. They're the ones in the classroom. They're seeing what's happening on the ground. And they can be a part of the policy making decisions around the ways that education can be structured in the future. I also think that students should be a part of the work. And I've been seeing
Yes.
in Miami-Dade, North Miami has a youth council, North Miami Beach has a youth council. So they're bringing in the local student voices in real intentional ways. On our board, we're starting to create a youth ambassador program as well. And so we also want to ensure that we have student voices at the table when we're thinking about co-creating what all of this looks like. And we are in a time of upheaval, but like I always say, after a time of upheaval becomes the most amount of change, and we have the opportunity to create something positive and beautiful if we seize it.
Yes. Yes. Seize the moment. I love that.
Seize the moment. So I think we're gonna cut here because your girl doing a whole lot of stuff. But listen, everyone, thank you again for subscribing to our newsletter, for engaging with us on YouTube, LinkedIn. We appreciate all the comments. We'll be back here again next week for episode 4. More to come. Thank you again so much, Jeffrey. I'm so happy to be doing this with you, my friend. And that's it for the Invaluable Educator. Peace.
Likewise. Take care, everybody.